Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins in a supermarket parking lot, where Helen Cutter is running from a gigantic creature. Inside the store, an employee with headphones doesn't notice her distress, even when she starts pounding on the glass. After dumping a row of carts almost on Helen, the animal heads for the cars and even causes an explosion. Helen, however, seemingly manages to escape the creature. 8 years later, a young man named Connor Temple wants to investigate rumors about a creature that seems to be a dinosaur. He brings the case to his professor, Nick Cutter, who is not very interested. Despite having an open mind, he soon sees that Connor is prone to various unsubstantiated theories. Nick's assistant, Stephen Hart, is even more skeptical. The two only agree to accompany the young man when he says the incidents occurred in the Forest of Dean area. Then we see from the photos on the shelf that Helen Cutter was Nick's wife. She disappeared in the Forest of Dean 8 years ago, while investigating sightings of a mysterious animal. Then we meet Abby Maitland, who works at Wellington Zoo as a reptile specialist. Her boss is Tim Parker, and he is explaining to her that the department will be downsized. Unhappy with the idea of being transferred to the insect wing, Abby decides to help with the correspondence for now. The letter that caught her attention is from a boy named Ben Trent, who lives near the Forest of Dean. At the same time, Nick arrives in the forest with Stephen and Connor. They examine a truck with strange marks near the point where the fence is destroyed. When Abby arrives at Ben's house, he shows her his lizard, Rex. The boy found it in the forest and wants to know which species it belongs to. Fascinated by the animal, Abby admits she doesn't know either and asks Ben to show her where he got it. A few minutes after entering the forest, the two are startled to see a cow hanging from a tree. At a hotel near the forest, Nick is caught by surprise when a woman greets him with a kiss on the cheek, trying to escape from a persistent flirt. Her name is Claudia Brown, and she's also there because of the monster, as she works at the home office and is tired of dealing with these rumors. Nick refuses to disprove the reports without checking first, but invites Claudia to join the team in the investigation. In the forest, Abby stumbles and ends up releasing Rex and is amazed to see it take flight. Far from her, Ben encounters a sort of portal. His curiosity overcomes his fear, and he gets closer until he can peek to the other side. While he admires other flying reptiles, Abby is still trying to catch Rex. Then she notes that it seems suddenly scared and soon discovers why. Reflected in the stream in front of her, she sees a huge predator. At the same time, Nick's crew has just discovered the hanging cow, and Connor shows that the compass needle is moving irregularly. Ben manages to find his way back home but injures his finger while passing through the fence. From his room, he hears a sinister roar that gets louder and realizes that the forest predator is sniffing the blood. Before he can hide, the animal's massive head breaks through the window and occupies almost the entire room. Ben throws various toys at the monster until a lamp sparks in its eyes. The beast gets irritated and leaves. Trying to get out of the forest with Rex, Abby encounters another large animal. The other 4 adventurers arrive shortly after, just as incredulous as she is. Abby and Nick study the creature, concluding it is a type of turtle. However, being a herbivorous animal, it certainly wasn't the one that adorned the tree with a cow. This concern leads them back to the Trent's house, where Ben's mother blames the zoo for driving her son crazy, who is now talking nonsense about encounters with dinosaurs. Reluctantly following Claudia's orders, Abby also dismisses the child's story to avoid confusion. Ben gets upset and says he even saw the past. Nick leaves there intrigued by the boy's words. The 3 return to the forest, where Connor and Stephen are watching the giant turtle. When the animal gets scared by the flashlights and flees, Nick decides to follow it and finally discovers the portal. The next morning, the place is already full of home office agents. Seeing Nick almost hypnotized, Stephen guesses that he is thinking about Helen. He agrees that she might have unintentionally entered the portal, but that doesn't explain why she didn't return. Nick and Abby are taken to Whitehall to sign paperwork, and Claudia meets her new supervisor, James Lester, who is not very friendly. Meanwhile, Stephen is with Connor in the forest, trying to find the dinosaur that attacked Ben. It doesn't take long before Nick loses his patience with James. He says he should be documenting the greatest scientific discovery of all time instead of chatting with a public servant. He also warns that he will cross the portal to find Helen and they will have to shoot him to stop him. In the lab, Abby criticizes the government scientists, saying they don't know how to handle reptiles. James arrogantly dismisses her opinion until Rex flies out of the lab, spreads terror throughout the building, and even takes the elevator. When he threatens to escape through the window, only Abby can convince him to come back. Realizing it will be tough to fight with this group, James approves Nick's expedition through the portal as long as he signs more papers, absolving the Home Office of any responsibility. In the forest, each one is doing what they know. Stephen examines the wide footprints on the ground while Connor consults his dinosaur catalog on the computer. Gathering all the clues, they conclude they are looking for a gorgonopsid, which is an animal from the Permian period famous for its ferocity. This is what Ben's teacher is about to find out as well. She is annoyed by his attempt to escape extra lessons when the boy warns that there is a dinosaur in the yard, but it is she who learns the lesson as soon as she opens the door. Luckily, Stephen appears just in time to divert the creature's attention outside the building but ends up fainting from the impact when the front door is destroyed. At the portal, Claudia informs Nick that Captain Ryan is going with him to the other side and warns that it's no use protesting. Everything starts to go wrong as soon as the two cross over. On this side, Connor notices the anomaly is getting weaker, while on the other side, Nick quickly ditches the soldier by asking for an hour alone. The time is almost up when Ryan shows a sort of encampment, deducing that there may be other explorers there. A few meters ahead, Nick finds a camera with Helen's initials. There's a skeleton right next to it, and Ryan says it could be what's left of her, but Nick replies it's a man's skeleton. He refuses to go with Ryan when it's time to return, and the soldier has to forcefully take him to the portal. He even tries to punch Ryan, which has little effect, and then the two notice that the passage is almost closing. Nick still insists on staying, but Ryan says he won't leave without him. This weighs on the professor's conscience, and he finally changes his mind. Everyone celebrates the duo's return, while Abby is secretly pleased to see that Rex also preferred this side. The anomaly closes shortly thereafter. Minutes later, the gorgonopsid attacks the camp, and chaos ensues. Trying to escape, Claudia ends up stumbling, and the beast advances towards her. Once again, it's Stephen who arrives to save the day, running over the dinosaur. It still gets up with a thirst for revenge, but Nick throws a weapon to Stephen, who finally manages to bring down the giant. The next day, James shows photos from Helen's camera, confirming she was on the other side of the portal. It's still unknown what caused the anomaly or how many times it has opened before. At night, a silhouette passes through Nick's living room, and he steps out onto the balcony. He is perplexed to see his wife on the corner, as if hiding in the shadows. Sometime later, a London woman has a horrible encounter with a giant insect in the subway. Still unaware of this, Connor is at college boasting about having seen a dinosaur to his friends Tom and Duncan. They don't believe his tale, especially since Connor isn't allowed to show any evidence. Nick is committed to rereading all of his wife's work looking for clues about the anomaly. He hasn't told anyone that Helen is alive yet. Meanwhile, Abby is enjoying life with Rex, who is now her secret pet when Connor shows up. He found something on the internet that might be a new anomaly but wants to confirm before talking to Nick. When Rex starts making noise, Connor discovers she is keeping the little creature hidden from James but promises to keep her secret. In the subway, an employee named George is fumigating the tunnels, unaware of the indirect help from the gigantic spider taking care of the rats. At the same time, James tells Claudia that he detests Nick's adventurous spirit and asks her to keep an eye on him, implying that she is enjoying this partnership beyond the professional. Obeying her boss, she goes to visit Nick and realizes he's distressed. He opens up to her about what happened with Helen and says it was all his fault. The two had been arguing a lot, mainly because he didn't accept her studying alternative theories about evolution, fearing she would be ridiculed by the scientific community. The guilt is even worse now because he knows she was right to question the traditional pillars of science. Meanwhile, Connor and Abby are camping by the creek, waiting for some unusual animal to pass by. Looking into his eyes, she asks if she can ask a personal question. Connor beams and says yes. His expression changes completely when he hears her asking if Stephen has a girlfriend. Upset, he says no and quickly adds that Stephen doesn't seem to like women very much. Abby gets annoyed and goes inside the tent. Then she texts Stephen, telling him everything about the stakeout. At night, Connor falls asleep in the midst of the vigil, and something begins to move nearby. Abby wakes up when the thing starts to roar. She rushes to wake Connor, and they are startled to see what appears to be a hungry dinosaur. However, when the creature approaches, its body collapses to the ground with a strange buzzing sound. It's just a toy, controlled by Tom and Duncan, Connor's classmates. Knowing he is always ready to believe anything foolish, the two decided to play a prank on him. The sound of sirens scares off the pranksters, leaving Connor disgruntled with his own stupidity. It's late at night, and poor George still hasn't finished his shift. In fact, he will never finish it, as he only realizes the huge disgusting creature behind him when it is too late. In the morning, Nick convinces the officer to release the young people, promising that they won't cause any more trouble. Very disappointed with Connor, he decides to cut him from the project and even asks him to switch advisors at the university. Abby feels guilty for having ratted out her friend but can do nothing about it. Then Claudia and Nick are called to the hospital to examine George, who is nearly dying. The bite is horrific, and the venom is very strong. The doctor cannot explain the case and says he arrived talking about monsters. Seeing that this could be a new anomaly, Claudia and Nick convince James to seal off that area of the subway. The station is soon taken over by special agents, who quickly encounter the creature. While the others try to contain it, Ryan looks up and is filled with horror as he sees the ceiling covered in arachnids. The spiders start to detach, jumping onto the agents to bite them too. All military equipment is useless against this type of attack. Ryan also realizes that the air is different down there, and the gunfire sounds more like explosions. Then the team is forced to retreat. Nick examines the agents who were bitten while Ryan describes the creatures. When he mentions the atmosphere, Steven says the anomaly must still be open, and the denser air is seeping through it. This didn't happen in the Forest of Dean because that portal led to the Permian period, and the air density was already closer to what it is today. Nick concludes that the subway anomaly is an opening to the Carboniferous period, roughly 300 million years ago. Claudia authorizes Nick to go down with Steven and Abby. As several agents have been bitten, she becomes apprehensive when the hospital informs her of George's death. Steven asks for the strongest flashlights possible, and upon reaching the tunnels, he confirms the guess that the spiders are sensitive to light. The trio soon arrives at the place where the agents were attacked and that is still infested. While Steven struggles to hold in his lunch, Abby discovers where the spiders entered. The slime trail leads them to the anomaly, where the spiders are still entering and exiting freely. At that moment, Abby drops her flashlight, and the beam of light illuminates something much larger than the spiders. Claudia is startled by the screams on the radio, and Nick explains that they are facing a kind of colossal centipede. Seeing Abby and Steven in danger, Nick whistles to distract the monster and orders the two to run to the station. He almost regrets this heroism when the creature charges after him, but Nick manages to shut a door before he gets hurt. Claudia calls his name on the radio, but suddenly her voice blends with Helen's, and once again he sees her out of the corner of his eye, as if she is trying to provoke him. Everyone becomes worried about the professor's delay, and Steven wants to go look for him. However, Claudia does not want to risk more lives without knowing anything about the animal, so she decides to ask Connor for help. As she steps away, Steven disobeys her orders and goes after his friend. The centipede soon finds him, but he manages to scare it off with fire. But when he approaches the anomaly, his equipment is sucked back into the past. His enemy immediately realizes he is defenseless. Furious at the disobedience, Claudia sends Ryan to fetch Steven while Connor arrives all happy to be useful. Steven is collapsed, suffering the effects of the venom when he also sees Helen right next to him. Nick soon arrives to help him, but she is no longer there. Steven tells him that Helen sent a message. She is waiting for him on the other side of the anomaly, and Nick will only know the truth when he goes there. The two manage to get back to the street, and paramedics take care of Steven. He keeps saying that Nick needs to tell the others about Helen, which greatly intrigues Claudia. Before getting into the ambulance, Steven invites Abby to dinner if he survives. She assures him that he will survive, and they will even be able to extend dinner into breakfast. At the hospital, the doctor says there is no treatment for a venomous centipede sting, as it doesn't exist. The only chance to determine an effective antidote would be with a sample of the venom. Meanwhile, Ryan and the other agents are using flashlights to guide the spiders back to the past. Knowing about Steven's situation, Nick asks him not to let the centipede cross the portal yet. Claudia can hardly believe it when the professor explains what he intends to do, but there is no other way. Down below, Ryan says the centipede did not pass through the anomaly, but no one can find it, until Connor finds a hole in the wall. It is all dark inside, but Nick is undeterred, and even Connor goes along, with Ryan right behind them. The hole leads them to another underground area, where the centipede watches them from above. As soon as it appears, Nick provokes it with a punch to the face, soon rewarded with a sting. Ryan begins to shoot, but the monster is unfazed. Connor defends himself with a bench that quickly disappears from his hands, bitten by the centipede. However, it then chokes and starts thrashing around until it gets electrocuted and dies. Only then do we see that Nick escaped unharmed. His arm was wrapped around a container, which is now filled with venom. From this sample, the doctors apply the correct antidote, and Steven begins to recover. He is feeling much better when Claudia visits him, wanting to know more about Helen's appearance. However, Stephen doesn't remember any of that. Abby realizes that their plans to have dinner together have also faded from his memory. Nick is deep in thought, looking at the subway portal when Connor timidly arrives and asks if he is forgiven. Grateful for the help with the centipede, Nick allows his return to the group. Sometime later, a young man named Anthony is with his girlfriend, Diane, at the club pool. When she goes to dry her hair, he takes the opportunity to practice diving, without seeing that there is a huge animal in the pool. Anthony dives straight into the creature's mouth, which jumps just in time to devour him. The noise startles Diane, and she returns to the pool and looks for her boyfriend but ends up getting a huge scare from the marine predator in the water. At the ministry, James watches Connor's experiments with the subway anomaly, which does not seem to be weakening, unlike the forest portal. Nick's theory is that anomalies do not close forever, and have existed for a long time. Dinosaurs lost in the future may have inspired various legends about monsters and dragons. Soon after, James receives the alert that another anomaly has been reported. Stephen has just been discharged, and Abby dresses up to offer him a ride. She can't even disguise her disappointment when he says his girlfriend is coming to pick him up. Her name is Allison, and she is back after 2 years researching contagious diseases abroad. Meanwhile, Nick is stirring up trouble with the police inspector who wants to arrest Diane for the murder of her boyfriend. He calmly explains that Anthony was devoured by an extinct marine creature millions of years ago. Claudia complains about Nick's excessive honesty, but also tries to help the girl, who everyone knows is innocent. Always concerned about public backlash, James prohibits the team from interfering in the girl's arrest and even says that, in jail, she won't give so many interviews to the tabloids. Hours later, we see the same prehistoric crocodile swimming in a lake full of bathers. No one sees it, but someone starts screaming when an amorphous mass suddenly emerges. Showing photos of the incident to his boss, Claudia says this is what is left of Anthony. The only explanation for it appearing so far away is that anomalies can change location. The marine monster crossed into this era inside the pool, devoured Anthony, then escaped back to its time before the police arrived, and then crossed the anomaly again, but this time it came out in the lake, where it vomited the parts it couldn't digest. With little argument, James allows the team to investigate the lake. Connor shows that the water level is dropping. This can only mean that the lake is leaking through the anomaly that is still open. 2 divers accompany Nick and Stephen to the bottom of the lake. The other two's task is to collect samples, and Connor complains that this more boring part always falls to him. He soon realizes he spoke too soon. No one thought the animal could still be on this side of the anomaly, but here it comes, slowly emerging. As Nick and Stephen approach the anomaly, Abby is petrified and tells Connor not to move. The alligator is taking a lap around the surface of the lake. When it reaches the farthest point, the two run out. The creature immediately halts its journey and moves toward the shore, pulling its massive body out of the water. Repeating his feat with the centipede, Connor hits the alligator with a paddle, which ends up breaking and jamming the creature's jaws. After spitting it out, the alligator gets annoyed with this time period and decides to go back home. As it crosses the anomaly, the passage closes. After the scare, Connor explains that it was a mosasaur from the Cretaceous period. To everyone's horror, Nick concludes that it was just a baby. Unfortunately, one of the divers ended up passing through the anomaly and did not return. Later, Nick explains a new theory to James. Like earthquakes, he thinks anomalies occur along fissures in spacetime. On a map, he draws a line connecting the 2 places where the marine anomaly opened. Certain that the next incident will be somewhere along this line, he suggests preventive monitoring. Nick admits that he can only prove the theory when there is a third point, but that is precisely what should be avoided, as it could also cause a third victim. Even so, James refuses to mobilize so many agents based on speculation. One of the locations on that line is a suburban house where Jane Dexter and her 2 children live. Going down to the basement to do laundry, she doesn't notice the start of the leak until she sees her own wet footprints in the kitchen. She goes back to check and finds everything flooded. At college, Tom and Duncan begin to suspect Connor's behavior. Afraid of being excluded again, he is being very careful not to leak anything else about the anomalies. The other 2 find it strange that he isolates himself this way and decide to watch him to find out what's going on. At the ministry, Stephen's memory begins to return when he sees images of the subway on a screen. He remembers talking to Helen and questions Nick about his silence regarding his wife. The professor confesses that he is afraid of discovering the truth, as Helen may have become a different person. She didn't even try to help Stephen when he was bitten, and she has left Nick in mourning all this time. Stephen disagrees with this attitude and argues that Helen was important to him too, but he promises not to tell anyone. Meanwhile, Jane takes the plumber down to the basement. Shocked by the water level, he says at least the dog is having fun, not hearing Jane reply that she doesn't have a dog. The prehistoric animal is so immobile on the shelf that the plumber mistakes it for part of the decoration. The creature only moves when he is too close to escape. The fright knocks him into the water, and they both struggle until Jane comes down to check. She can only see the plumber trying to climb the stairs before being pulled back into the water with a scream of horror. The incident reaches James, who becomes even more irritated with Nick upon learning that he was right. To make matters worse, the diver's body appears in Jane's basement, proving it's the same anomaly. Additionally, there's a handkerchief with Helen's initials tied to the diver's wrist. Claudia shows it to Nick and questions him about his secrets. He confesses his furtive encounters with his wife and tries to justify himself using the same reasons he gave Stephen. Claudia responds that Helen's knowledge about the phenomenon is more important than any marital quarrel, and by ignoring her messages, Nick is being irresponsible. Speaking of marital spat, Stephen is trying to apologize to Abby now that his memory is back. He even says that his relationship is not going well, but Abby is still angry and does not forgive him. Shortly thereafter, James calls an emergency meeting at Jane Dexter's house. He reveals to everyone that Helen is alive and forces Nick to fetch her immediately. If he does not go, James threatens to remove him from the project and send a team to capture his wife by force. Then Stephen ties a rope to Nick and gives him a harpoon to defend himself from marine predators. The professor swims through the passage and finds himself in a completely different ocean. Emerging on a beach, he doesn't have to look too hard before finding Helen relaxing in a lake. Deeply hurt, he begins to accuse her of all his suffering over 8 years. Helen says he would have shared the secret of the anomalies with the whole world, and she couldn't let that happen. Meanwhile, Connor realizes that any animal that entered Jane's basement may have escaped into the sewer. Abby and Stephen start planning a solution when Claudia arrives. She behaves strangely and shuts the door in their faces, while several special agents begin to put on diving gear. At the Cretaceous Lake, Helen invites Nick to join her on her incredible trips through time. He says that the anomalies have been fatal to many people in the present, and therefore he can't abandon his work. She also refuses to leave her new life and says that human life doesn't compare to everything the planet has seen. Disappointed with this coldness, Nick decides to return without her, but the return dive is much less peaceful. Attacked by a juvenile mosasaur, he finds the harpoon ineffective. The creature charges again and ends up bursting his air tank. Nick only escapes because an adult mosasaur suddenly arrives and attacks the smaller one. Seeing that 2 hours have passed, Stephen pulls the rope and brings Nick back, unconscious. As he recovers, Claudia sends the divers to capture Helen and tells the others that she is only following orders. When Nick tries to get out of the ambulance, he is stopped by armed agents and is shocked to see Helen being detained. She looks at him angrily, thinking her husband turned her in, while Claudia enters the car without looking directly at anyone. In a building in central London, Samira is taking care of the house while her young son takes a bath. The boy sees the toilet lid moving as if something is trying to get out. Then, the head of what seems to be a snake appears inside the bowl. Samira notifies authorities, and the case is passed to Claudia during Helen's interrogation, which is not going well. She refuses to answer James's questions, even when he reminds her that he can do anything with a person who is officially dead. When agents arrive at Samira's apartment, Nick feels relieved to see it's really just a snake. Abby is called to help the boys handle the reptile. Connor takes the completely inopportune moment to announce that he's without a home and asks to sleep on her couch for a few days. At the ministry, Helen claims she has something important to reveal but demands Nick's presence. Then she says there is a herd of tigers very close to an anomaly that is open in London. Tom gives Connor a ride to Abby's house and takes the opportunity to gift him with an alien keychain, in which Duncan installed a GPS. The two are left open-mouthed when Abby appears at the door. Connor even manages to get a kiss for the audience to see, threatening to report Rex's kidnapping to James. Nick convinces James that Helen is telling the truth about the tigers. She takes the agents to a football stadium and shows there is indeed an anomaly in the kitchen. Seeing several pies in the freezer, Helen says this is a danger because the meat will attract the tigers. The agents begin removing the food, and Helen runs into the portal before they can stop her. Ryan and Stephen also cross over but soon realize it's impossible to follow her, as the other side is filled with portals, all open at the same time. As Ryan and Stephen return, a dozen Dodos arrive shortly after. The birds are not dangerous but make a lot of mess, and no one can stop them. One of them eats the alien keychain, confusing the two idiots outside. Duncan even asks if the government turned his friend into a turkey. But Tom recognizes the famous extinct dodo and suspects Connor is involved in illegal cloning. In the kitchen, Ryan informs Nick that one of the birds seems to have suddenly died. During the autopsy, they discover the flock had been infected by parasites. Unaware of this, Tom and Duncan take the other dodo home. Tom dreams about the money this discovery will earn them, but for now, Duncan only sees losses. When a T-Rex appears on the television, the bird gets so nervous that it breaks the TV. Reading about the species on the internet, Tom says that his new pet is slow, dumb, and harmless. Almost as if it understood what he said, the dodo immediately attacks and pecks his arm. Tom even considers that the government developed a war dodo. In the lab, Nick displays the parasite and explains its life cycle. The larva invades the host and destroys its nervous system as it grows. When James comments that the only good side of parasites is that they usually keep the host alive, Nick observes that this one is different. Its only goal is reproduction, and for that reason, it dies along with the host shortly after laying eggs. While Duncan tries to keep that strangely aggressive dodo locked in the room, Tom writhes on the floor, already feeling the effects of the infection. He doesn't let his friend take him to the hospital, fearing becoming the target of secret scientific experiments. As soon as the dodo's beak pierces the door, Duncan abandons his position and tries to convince Tom to call someone. Only then does he realize that Tom himself is also behaving much less docilely than normal. Duncan panics and runs out. Making a wise decision for the first time, he confesses everything to Connor, who immediately informs the ministry. The whole team arrives at their house minutes later. Nick reminds everyone that the goal is to isolate the parasite and prevent it from passing to another host. When Claudia asks who the idiot was who kidnapped the bird, Duncan promptly states he knows his rights and that there's no law mentioning extinct animals. She responds that the dodo belongs to the British government and stealing it is an act of treason. When they enter the apartment, the poor dodo is dead, and Tom has already left. At this moment, he is coughing violently in the emergency room waiting area. Seeing the people around becoming frightened, he runs to the bathroom, where he sees the thing moving under his skin. Taking the case to James, Nick explains that the boy only has a few more hours. If he is not found in time, he will not only lose his life but likely spread the parasite as well, through a bite or a kiss. In a nasty comment about Tom, James says the bite is more likely. Unfortunately, he is right. When Tom is finally seen at the hospital, the doctor is shocked by the tests and recommends emergency surgery. But when he gets closer, the patient bites his hand and escapes. As the parasite is sensitive to light, Tom turns off all the lights along the way. He calls Duncan and says the conspiracy is even worse than he expected, as the government is trying to dominate the population from the inside out. He becomes angry when Duncan responds more sensibly and gets even more irritated when Duncan hands the phone to Connor. Realizing the call must be tracked, Tom throws the phone into the toilet. Only then does he remember the GPS, which is still in the stomach of the dodo that bit him. Hoping to get incriminating evidence against the government, he decides to follow the signal. Meanwhile, Nick is with Claudia and Steven at the hospital, talking to the infected doctor. After seeing his suffering, Nick talks to Claudia and assures her that Helen did not plan this part. She may be cold and selfish, but she is not cruel. Abby is about to dissect the dodo when she senses an intruder's presence. Pulling back the plastic curtain, she comes face to face with Tom. His appearance is terrible and he starts begging her for help, but soon his plaintive appeals turn into shouts of anger. Only then does she realize she is in danger. At the ministry, Duncan is taken to the interrogation room. Steven and Nick are trying to figure out Tom's next steps and finally discover there is a tracker in the dodo's body. Remembering that the bird is with Abby, Steven panics. At her house, Tom continues to oscillate between a scared boy and an irrational predator. Abby says the ministry can help him remove the parasite, but he still thinks he was intentionally infected and won't hear of it. When his aggressiveness goes overboard, she changes strategy and says she will show him the whole truth. She takes him to the stadium to show the anomaly, but the portal is already closed and Tom becomes even more agitated, thinking it's a trap. Abby knocks down some shelves between them and manages to topple him with a kick, but it doesn't delay him much. Then she runs through the stadium corridors and hides in the locker room. He follows shortly after, roaring with rage while he searches for her. Abby suddenly emerges from a locker and strikes him, then runs to the field. The agents arrive just as he jumps at her. Connor rushes to the front of the two and asks Ryan not to shoot. Several laser points are on Tom's head, and he realizes he's surrounded. His expression seems to have returned to normal. Connor starts talking about the nerd things they both like, and asserts that Tom has the power to fight against the dark side. He loosens his grip on Abby, and she manages to break free. Tom asks if at least he was right about the conspiracy. Connor admits he was and even exaggerates, including things like mind control. Everyone starts to panic when Tom's eyes turn altered again, but he just touches Connor's shoulder and cries. Seeing that his friend is very ill, Connor congratulates him for resisting the government so bravely and calls him a hero. Tom cannot resist the effects of the parasite and collapses to the ground, lifeless. Devastated, Connor blames himself for getting him involved, but Nick says he can still honor his friend's memory by helping to keep alive the government conspiracies that, deep down, he so loved. Days later, a man named Andy is playing golf when he hits the ball into a lagoon. He puts his hand in the water to retrieve it, almost touching a submerged fossil. A few minutes later, he loses the ball again, this time in the middle of a thicket. Andy ends up cutting his finger on a sharp leaf and shakes his hand, spreading a little blood. Immediately after, he sees something that terrifies him. Andy starts running and yelling. When his friend finally hears, it's already too late. The team arrives shortly, and Claudia urges Ryan to close off the golf course area. Nick says the only witness did not see the animal and that, in fact, he doesn't even know if there really is an anomaly there. Connor is still staying at Abby's house, though he said it would only be for a few days. Before leaving for yoga, she asks him to take care of Rex. However, when Nick informs him of the new case, he rushes out and forgets to close a window. Connor gets into the car and doesn't notice that the lizard has decided to join the adventure, flying into the vehicle. At the golf course, Nick is convinced they're dealing with an anomaly when he sees the victim's body. Andy was practically boneless, with very little flesh wasted. Stephen finds no trace of the animal but confirms that the magnetic field indicates an anomaly present nearby. Abby has also arrived, and Nick asks the two to be quiet for a moment. They are confused and say they're not hearing anything. The professor explains that this is the problem because the norm would be to have birds singing. Something must have scared the birds, driving them away from the area. Only then does Nick think to look up and discovers the portal is right above them. This means they are dealing with an aerial predator, which will make Ryan's job of sealing the perimeter much more difficult. Nick starts grumbling that the creature could already be far away when Stephen warns him that's not quite the case. A large pteranodon is crossing the sky, barely missing the trio with a swooping flight. When Connor arrives, the guard lets him pass, finding his pet a bit strange. Only when he parks, and Rex appears right in front of him does the young man realize the lizard's escape. Carefully, he tries to catch Rex to lock him in the car, but he doesn't succeed. The other three are still observing the majestic pteranodon when Stephen sees Connor behaving strangely. He is so worried about catching the little creature that he doesn't hear his friend's shouts, trying to warn him about the other winged animal. Only when Rex himself starts showing fear does he think to turn around, and he is petrified by what's coming his way. Nick keeps yelling and tells him to run under the trees. Connor obeys, with Rex keeping pace and the pteranodon right behind them. Claudia gives the order for Ryan to shoot, but Nick asks for a moment. He says something about all this doesn't make sense. Besides, they should only take down these creatures as a last resort. Shocked by the professor's priorities, Claudia reminds Ryan who is in charge there. He obeys and pulls the trigger, but Nick pushes him, deflecting the shot and saving the pteranodon. Ignoring Claudia's scolding, the professor observes the chase through binoculars. Connor ends up getting away, and the pteranodon disappears. When Nick mentions that there's also a small flying lizard, everyone understands what's going on, and Abby is the one getting scolded now. She glares at Connor as soon as he joins the group, but Nick tells her she can keep Rex if she manages to find him. Using satellite images, Stephen searches for the pteranodon in the tallest surrounding places. He finds it atop an office building. While Connor tries to redeem himself by helping Abby find Rex, Nick goes on the pteranodon hunt with Claudia and Stephen. When Claudia sees Stephen is armed with tranquilizer darts, she understands why the two didn't want to wait for Ryan. She allows them to try capturing the animal alive, but only until the agents arrive. If they fail, she wants Ryan to eliminate the threat. Reaching the rooftop, the pteranodon takes off before Stephen can shoot. Nick says they need to lure it back and asks to borrow Claudia's blouse because of its color. Remembering that he has a similar shirt, Stephen decides to be chivalrous and offers his. The agents are already coming up the elevator when Nick sets up the trap and Stephen aims again. The creature's speed makes it very difficult to hit, and Stephen only succeeds when it gets close. The pteranodon crashes onto the roof with a thud and slides almost to the edge, cornering Claudia. Very irritated, she starts arguing with Nick until a wing spasm makes her go silent, losing consciousness. She wakes up in the hotel next to the golf course. There's a pool of blood on the floor, but the doctor says it was just a mild concussion. Nick examines her affectionately and asks if she is feeling well. She says yes, except for the fact that she can't see anything. In the woods, Abby and Connor celebrate joyfully when they finally find Rex. Standing face to face with the lizard, they notice its wings are tightly folded and it's trembling. Already knowing there's something terrifying behind them, they slowly turn their heads. The branches of the tree are taken over by a flock of small flying carnivores. Then they all take flight simultaneously, as if they have been suddenly attracted to something. In the infirmary, Claudia feels calmer as her vision begins to return. Ruining the almost romantic moment, Stephen calls Nick talking about excrement. His analysis of the material determined that the pteranodon is innocent and did not attack Andy. Nick says he needs to hang up because the battery is dying. Claudia overhears the conversation and starts laughing, wanting Nick to admit he just got lucky with his guess. He responds seriously, reminding her that this means the real culprit is still on the loose. As he finishes saying this, the screams start outside. Fearing danger is approaching, Nick rushes to close the doors and windows. One of the birds hits the phone line outside before he can call for help. Then he says he will look for another phone and tells Claudia that she is completely safe inside. Still seeing very little, she gropes the window slowly, wanting to ensure it is well shut, and nearly dies of fright when a bird slams into the glass. Then we see that the whole flock is right there, and the first ones begin to break the glass, eager to attack her. Very tense, she slips in the blood and ends up smearing her clothes in it. Nick arrives just in time to help her escape the infirmary. He then notices that the main room is very dark. Looking up, he sees the dome covered in birds for a brief moment before it also shatters. Finally locked in a room with no glass windows, Nick says he still needs to find a phone. He kisses Claudia goodbye and risks a run to the ambulance, closing the door just in time to prevent the creatures from coming in. While he calls Ryan, Claudia hears a noise inside and panics when she notices ashes falling from the chimney. Armed with a golf club, she manages to fend off the first creature, but soon the rest of the flock begins to exit through the fireplace. Meanwhile, Nick improvises a flamethrower with what he found in the ambulance and defends himself from the attacks on the way back to the hotel. Claudia is completely surrounded by the killer swarm when the door opens and Helen appears to save her. The two run to the kitchen, and Helen sets a trap, heating a metal jug in the microwave while turning on the stove's gas. She opens the door and waits for the creatures to follow Claudia. Only when everyone is in the kitchen does she tell the other to exit through the second door. Helen also exits through the other door seconds before the explosion occurs. Nick is very scared, but Claudia soon appears and tells him that Helen saved her. Relieved and grateful, she decides not to inform James about the pteranodon, allowing Nick and Stephen to return it to its era. A few days later, in the forest of Dean, the first anomaly suddenly reappears. Since the area is being monitored, one of the agents quickly informs about the incident. While he examines a section of the fence where the passage has clearly been forced, we see that something is lurking in the distance. The specialists arrive quickly and search the forest, but nothing is found. At the zoo where Abby works, something strange occurs in the lion's cage. The felines become agitated as a strange creature approaches. Unafraid of the kings of the jungle, the intruder tears through the fence and invades the enclosure. The next day, Abby receives a message saying that one of the lions has simply disappeared. Connor accompanies her to the zoo, but neither of them can unravel the mystery. Besides the broken fence, the only other clue was a blood-stained leaf. At the university, Stephen is surprised by a visit from Helen. She wants to talk to the ministry about the missing people over the last 2 days. Saying she misses her student, Helen kisses Stephen goodbye, which is not very pedagogical. Meanwhile, the mysterious creature observes Abby from a distance but then decides to focus on Tim Parker. He is leaving the zoo and talking on his phone, unaware that he is being followed by something that looks like a wingless bat. The next day, Connor tells Abby that the samples taken from the lion's cage have already been analyzed. The only DNA that is not lion matches several types of bats, but it doesn't fit any known species. Seeing that her friend is not very attentive, he asks what the problem is, and Abby reveals that her boss has been missing since yesterday. In a park, Helen meets with some team members. She says that the recent kidnappings are the work of a highly evolved predator that captures its prey silently before taking it to its den. Stephen asks for the name of the species, but she says the animal does not have a classification. Knowing she is about to give shocking information, she explains that this predator is from the future. Helen has not been there personally, but she encountered the creature in the Permian period during one of her travels. As soon as they are alone, Nick asks her to explain herself better, suspecting her helpful attitude. She confesses that this is partly her fault. Helen fled to the present while the monster was chasing her, which is why it ended up coming after her. Connor is killing time in the office with Steven and comments on the strange DNA in the lion's cage, also mentioning that Tim Parker has vanished. Steven immediately connects the case with the future predator. Knowing Abby is at work, he hurries out and asks Connor to send reinforcements to the zoo. Steven feels that something is wrong as soon as he finds her at the aquarium. The lights at the end of the corridor start to flicker, and then a huge, eyeless creature jumps in front of them. The animal begins to approach Steven and Abby, but quickly flees when the agents appear. Concluding that the predator's den must be in the zoo's woods, the whole group heads there. A bit jealous of each other, Claudia and Helen exchange jabs about Nick. As soon as the team enters the woods, one of the agents is pulled away so quickly that everyone is disoriented. The predator soon reappears, leaping from branch to branch, and almost attacks Nick before it leaves. Connor realizes that this animal navigates by sound, like bats. So he goes to the car to get a device called an oscilloscope that can help locate it. The sensor picks up a presence very close as soon as Connor turns on the device. Then, the vehicle shakes when something jumps on the roof. The metal body starts to creak, and we see the animal descending from the back. Connor peeks over his shoulder, terrified. Suddenly, the creature appears on the hood and breaks the windshield. The boy practically presses his back against the seat so the beast won't reach him, and then he slips out the door. Sitting on the ground, he can't control his heartbeat, and his position becomes even more exposed. Abby runs over and starts throwing stones at the monster bravely. Before she herself can be attacked, Steven arrives shooting and drives the creature away. Then the sweep begins with the oscilloscope, leading the team to a cage storage area. Helen finds a nest full of hatchlings inside, which finally explains the recent kidnappings. Since the newborns do not yet know how to hunt, the predator has to bring the victims to that place. At that moment, the device starts beeping louder, and a thud is heard on the roof. The agents try to adjust their aim, but the predator is too fast and soon attacks one of them. Seeing that the shots aren't having much effect, Nick grabs one of the hatchlings and runs. Infuriated, the predator follows him into a greenhouse. Then he shoots upward, shattering the glass roof and confusing the creature, which can't locate him amidst the noise. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Nick manages to take down the creature with a precise shot. All the hatchlings are boxed up, and James can't wait to deal with them. But Helen explains that this doesn't solve the problem. The anomaly leading to the future is still open in the Permian period, and nothing prevents many other beasts from finding their way to the present. She suggests using the hatchling's instincts to locate the portal to the future and then keep a heavy guard around it. James authorizes the expedition for the next day. Nick and Helen will take the hatchlings along with Ryan and his team. With an uneasy feeling, Claudia asks Nick not to go with them. He says it will be fine, and then she bids farewell with a long passionate kiss right in front of Helen. As they enter the anomaly, Connor receives a call from the lab informing him that the future predator was male and couldn't have reproduced. What he doesn't know is that the female is right there in the woods. She crosses the portal so fast that no one sees her. In the Permian period, Helen asks Nick to take a picture of her while the agents set up camp. He is shocked to realize he has seen this picture before. This means the anomaly has brought them to the Permian period, but not exactly on the same date. On this side of the portal, that first visit from Nick and Ryan is still years away from happening. All the traces found that time are being left on this expedition. As the hatchlings begin to stir, Helen becomes excited and says that the door to the future must be close. Only then does Nick understand that this was her objective all along. However, even Helen is caught by surprise when one of the agents is suddenly knocked down by the predatory widow. Ryan rushes to the cage and tries to stop her from releasing the hatchlings but ends up being attacked. Then the creature suddenly stops, and we see a huge gorgonopsid before it. The two beasts confront each other, and the female seems to be losing. While Nick helps Ryan, the gorgonopsid starts devouring the hatchlings, one by one. The mother gathers her remaining strength and has a brutal fight against the gorgonopsid to avenge her devoured offspring, but it is useless and ends up being defeated once and for all. Ryan also does not survive his injuries. In his last words, he makes a sad comment about the first time he was there, realizing that skeleton was his own. With no hatchlings left to sniff out the future, Nick and Helen conclude the mission by burying the agents. But Helen is still not ready to give up on the adventure and tells Nick they can continue searching. The anomaly has to be around here. Nick says she can stay if she wants but refuses the invitation to keep her company. Jealous, she starts asking if he will reject her to be with Claudia, which he does not deny. Perched on a distant rock, two hatchlings observe the couple's fight. Back in the present, Helen takes revenge on her husband's rejection and invites Steven to go with her, revealing to everyone that the two had an old affair. Nick is very upset with his friend, as expected, but Steven also rejects her, realizing she does not deserve his affection. Unfazed, Helen crosses the passage alone. When Nick asks where Claudia is, James says he doesn't know anyone by that name. The others also don't remember her. Horrified, Nick realizes that some interference with the past altered the timeline, erasing Claudia from his life.